Okay, Andrew, and you've mentioned to me when we chat before the interview that you're interested in the business of making money from gambling, which I imagine a lot of people watching this will be as well, whichever method of gambling it is, whether it be stocks and shares or whatever, or horse racing. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that, please?
I can, Simon. I'd also caveat that by saying, if I start off on January the 1st with £100 and do some gambling, and at the end of the year end up with £106, that's a winning year. And if you can replicate 6% year on year over 25 years, you're going to come out with a fair sum of money. So what I'm trying to say there is in the financial space, and I think probably for your would-be bettors and your would-be gamblers, there is this idea of, you have to kind of work out what kind of gambler you are, what kind of punter you are, where is your risk appetite. Do you want to treble your money in 2 days? Well, best of British luck to you if you can do that, but the chances of you replicating that week in, week out are extremely unlikely. So I would say myself, I'm sort of a slow and steady gambler, and in a way I'm trying to replicate the sorts of returns that I am used to seeing and I know are capable of being achieved in the financial space. So if you look at all the data going back 100 years on, mature stock markets like those in the US and in the UK and so on, probably net, you're talking about returns of 7-8% a year. And that means we're talking about backing 1 to 14, 1 to 12, 1 to 14 shots. So, and that doesn't appeal to everybody. But, as I say, 7% per annum return compounded over 25 years, and we should all be, pretty happy with that. So, I in a way, as I say, I try and and I find it very odd actually when people go to the races, even for a recreational or social day out. You talk to people and they say, "Well, I've taken £100. I expect to lose it all, or I'll come back, have a lovely day, but I don't mind if I come back with nothing." Well, actually, I always think, well, do you know what? Yeah, why don't you spend a little bit more time in between sips of champagne or pints or whatever, just having a little look at the form, just trying to see if you can eke out, maybe coming back with £60 of your £100 if you're taking, if you're going to spend £5 a race, try and maybe come back with half the money you took out to be staking it. I think it's the mentality and the psychology of investing and gambling. In some respects they're not so different. But whereas if someone went to a fund manager or looked at their pension fund and saw big losses year on year in those situations or in their savings accounts, they would go into conniptions. I think it's a different kind of mentality when we're going for a recreational day's punting. And so we just have to just work out where we stand on the risk spectrum and understand that, very, leverage returns are probably not achievable. But, that's each to their own. So I won't necessarily absolutely criticise people for thinking they can turn a fortune overnight, but we kind of know that's not very likely.
Okay, so is that your personal punting? You'd be looking for absolutely nailed on and chisel out a few quid over a year, looking for those big odds on certainties? Or?
I think so. Coupled with, I'm quite a fan of what's called core satellite investing. This is kind of almost a 1980s, 1990s concept, whereby you stick a lot of institutional pension funds and big institutional asset managers would stick a lot of money into tracking the index because a lot of fund managers don't beat the index. We know that. So why would you even employ the services of a fund manager who says that's what they can do when we know a lot of them can't? So core satellite investing involves kind of betting the index and then also, but taking risk at the margins on slightly more elaborate or slightly more risky markets, maybe emerging markets or stuff like that. And I suspect that's one way of doing things. So you could, that's one way of investing in the stock market. It's just one way. Other people will always look to replicate a market. They'll do their asset allocation differently. But personally, yeah, I think if I go to the races for a day out now and I start off with X in my pocket and I come back with 50% of X, I think I've had a really lousy day. If I come back with 101% of X, I'm thinking not bad.
So would you bet every day recreational? No, not recreationally. Would you bet every day to make money, or would you just look for opportunities?
No, I mean, as I say, I'm you know, hands on the table. I'm a journalist, and I make my crust from writing, you know, and editing and doing that kind of stuff. I thought it was quite a big enough risk when I left the FT in 1999 to become a freelance writer. I used to employ a lot of freelance writers, but never had actually done it myself. So I cut all the cords and went, you know, safety net free to see if I could eke out a crust from writing. And I'm very glad to say I did that. And in fact, it was about that time, through, you know, the late 90s, early noughties, where people said to me, well, actually, Andrew, you'd write finance is your bread and butter, but you obviously clearly love your horse racing. Why don't you go down the horse racing route full time? So, as luck would have it, and serendipity is often a way in these things, in I think it was 2002, 2003, an old acquaintance of mine, James Hipwell, was launching, who many people will know for all and sundry reasons, was launching a sports betting magazine. He was going to be the editor of a sports betting magazine called Inside Edge, published by Dennis Publishing. And he got in touch with me and said, well, do you fancy being the kind of freelance horse racing editor? And this was music to my ears, and also it meant I could go back to kind of basics, because having been slightly well known in the financial space, I, you know, tried to get hold of a press badge. And obviously the racing, the authorities that issued press badges in those days didn't know me from Adam, didn't care what my backstory was in the financial world. So they said, well, you better get a portfolio of stories together, Sonny, to kind of convince us of your intention. So I did that. And so I had a lovely time working on Inside Edge for 3 or 4 years. And even then, we're talking at a time when, you know, we're talking a monthly magazine with long lead-in times, writing about Cheltenham Festival or Glorious Goodwood or whatever it was. And you know, even back, we're not talking more than what was 15, 16 years ago, the availability of race information and archives of racing videos just did not exist. So I go back to that kind of age-old thing of compiling your own data, the importance of doing that, working through the numbers, trying to spot trends, trying to spot stuff that might give you an edge, and did that for Inside Edge for, you know, a few years, which was great fun.
Now, you talk about Inside Edge. I would have thought one thing that is very similar in both financial investing and horse racing is inside information. Now, which is the most reliable?
Oh, there's a question. Well, we all know inside information in the financial space is naughty, and I suspect actually in this day and age, compared with even the time when I came into the financial space in the late 80s, it's, you know, there is much less of it goes on. But then at the same time, we know, don't we? It always never ceases to amaze me, actually, that, you know, you talk about great racing gambles and great plots and great coups, you know, kind of perpetrated by racing stables. And what always never ceases to amaze me is that it wouldn't be marvellous if there were 2, you know, plots and coups going on at the same time, you know, for the same big race, Sadarowich or something, and, you know, only one can win. So even when you think you've actually got a surefire thing going, you know, you can never be totally sure. And I suppose, you know, with my background, you know, my characteristics I think are quite good to be a journalist, because I'm quite suspicious and I'm quite cynical, and I can know one end of a set of numbers from another. So I think this kind of feeds into my, you know, just because someone says something is an absolutely surefire winner, is an absolutely surefire winning way to end up, you know, in the gutter financially.
And then tell us a bit more about your Swinley Bottom blog that you did.
Yeah, well, Swinley Bottom, it's interesting. I keep saying I'm a journalist really through and through, and obviously even through the noughties, the idea of blogging was quite a nascent thing. It has really obviously come on a pace in recent years, and how marvellous is it for people now to self-publish on any subject they desire. But as I say, I lived in Ascot as an undergraduate back in the late 80s, the mid 80s, and I used to run round. Ascot Racecourse was a much more open public space for the public just to wander around outside of race days in those days, and I used to go running round the inside of the racecourse, and I was always intrigued by this part of this race called Swinley Bottom, which I thought would be a jolly good, if good name for a blog. So I came up with this name, top comment from racing's most famous bottom. And that gives me a kind of an out nowadays to write about whatever I so desire. I'm interested in not just gambling and the horse racing and trying to find winners, which I guess is what Swinley Bottom's about. I'm also very interested in the business of horse racing, how bookmakers make things pay, how race courses make things pay, how they can offer some value to the race-going punter. And one thing I would say, because I gave up my press badge a while back, I've always been a supporter of racecourse memberships as well. I stump up, I put my hands in my pocket for Newmarket membership, Cheltenham membership, Warwick membership as well. And know what it's like to go through the gates having paid for a season ticket effectively to the racecourses. So I'm interested in that stuff. I think probably there is a publishing opportunity there in terms of the way different companies come and go with their racecourse and racing and race sponsorships. I think that's all terribly interesting. I was having a chat with a bookmaker the other day who sponsored the whole card of a race meeting just recently. And I tweeted something actually, and the guy came back to me and direct messaged me, and we had a little chat because I was wondering whether this chap, as the boss of this bookmaking firm, was actually getting very good value from the racecourse, given that he had sponsored the whole 7-race card. Because I do think there is perhaps a slight feeling and sense that maybe from the kind of the establishment side of racing, that all of us Johnny-come-latelys that maybe put up money to sponsor race meetings or sometimes pay to come through the front door could all be done if they could all be done aside with. Actually, that would be just fine by from the more established ranks within the canon. And we had this kind of to and fro, and he said, well, what do you think that they could have done more for us as a race course better? And I said, well, I think they could have given you much more credit in this race card. I think they could have given you more broadcast credit on the day in terms of paddock interviews and so on. And I just, I think the business of racing in all its many guises, not just trying to find the winner of the Stewards' Cup, are very interesting.